very great pleasure to announce the first recipient of the Society's Making Menstruation Matter Award. Now this award, which carries with it a very modest honorarium, recognizes a journalist, activist, artist, public figure, or organization that has meaningfully contributed to the public understanding of menstrual cycle-related issues. The intention of this award is to honor and encourage thoughtful dialogue about the menstrual cycle beyond the academy. And our award honors Ms. Gloria Steinem, a woman who has been a pioneer in many political and social efforts to make women matter. A woman who has led the fight for equality and recognition of women's worth at home and abroad. A woman who has made lasting contributions to breaking down taboos that have held women back. One of the many topics, that Ms. Steinem has raised for public consideration is the menstrual cycle. In 1978, as you saw, about the same time as our society was forming, her article, If Men Could Menstruate, was published in Ms. Magazine. And with tongue-in-cheek, she broke the menstrual taboo of concealment, and in so doing, gave a kind of social permission to discuss this topic further. We think that it's entirely appropriate to honor the bravery Ms. Steinem has shown throughout her career in articulating and calling attention to the details of women's experiences broadly considered. The intersection of her lifetime achievements and our society's interests is no doubt an example of how far-reaching Ms. Steinem's work has extended. For our part, we want her to know that her work has and continues to energize ours. And we know there are others who, like us, have been and are similarly inspired by Ms. Steinem to continue to work in their own ways to enhance the quality of girls' and women's lives. Ms. Steinem, it is with great gratitude that we honor you this evening. Please come and receive it.
I can't tell you how happy I am that you exist. Having tried to raise this subject before you existed, I understand how crucial you are. And I also want to thank you for recognizing the power of laughter. You know, to teach with laughter is something I think we neglect. And since doing that, I've realized that laughter is, in a way, the only free emotion. You know, you can compel fear, of course. You can also compel love if you keep someone isolated and dependent for long enough in order to survive. They come to believe they love their captor. But you can't compel laughter. It's when you learn something. Two things come together in an unexpected way. It is truly free. And it's supposed to be a sign of learning, in fact. So thank you for that. Thank you for making it okay to continue to talk about menstruation. Thank you for having this in my neighborhood. I just walked here. I've been asked about what led up to this essay, but since you've read the essay, there is a lot in there about what led up to it. So I will start before that and say that I think the first inkling for me was taking that classic trip down or up, I've never known, the Nile, you know, from the most African Nubian parts toward Cairo. And has anybody else done this here? So, you know, when you see the carvings in the oldest part, and God is represented as everything, as papyrus and butterflies and men and women and everything, right? in the remains of the sculpture. Then you get back in your boat, you go a little further, it's a thousand years later, and suddenly the goddess has a son, but no daughter. Then you get back in, it's another 1,000 years, the son has grown up to be a consort. Still longer, and the goddess is reduced to being a throne on which the pharaoh sits. And then still longer in modern day, to mosques in which no representation of females or nature is allowed. And at the same time I was reading Henry Breasted, a great Egyptologist of the late 1800s and early 1900s, who says monotheism is but imperialism in religion. Is that a sentence? So I began to think about the fact that what we regard as history and normalcy and human nature even is really less than 5% of human history. I mean, the last 5,000 years, we've been around at least 100,000 years. They keep moving it backward every decade or so. So on this continent, where the original cultures, the 500 or 600, what we would call Native American cultures, were here and in force until only 500 or 600 years ago. So it's only 1%. And before that, before monotheism made God look like the ruling class, and therefore the ruling class was God, there was a whole different attitude, obviously, towards everything having to do with being a female human being. There probably was not gender in the language. For instance, in Cherokee in this country, there's no he and she. Human beings are human beings. So how did we get so crazy as to give gender to tables and chairs? What is that about? It's about politics. I mean, the whole, in a deep sense, politics is about power. It's about controlling reproduction. And indeed, gender itself, which is an invention, just like race is an invention. We all came from the same people in Africa. Some of us went to Europe and lost our melanin because we needed to get more vitamin D and so on and so. I mean, you know, there are all kinds of followings now of the of DNA tracks, so we have a better idea and a better proof that we all came from the same place. So the cultures for the first 95% of human history were profoundly, profoundly different. And needless to say, there was a hugely different attitude towards menstruation. On this continent, as we know, in original cultures, it was regarded as a time in which females were especially powerful. It was in other cultures, I was reminded of this watching the revulsion of the males, that in fact in some cultures, as we know, menstrual blood is spread on their arms and skin and bodies in order to keep them safe in battle, to underscore a sacred ceremony. I mean, you all know this better than anyone else on earth. So think how profoundly different that is. So I think that was the background to the humor. But there were also more recent antecedents. For instance, we had in the very first issue, or one of the first issues of Ms., I think, published an article about men's monthly cycles. Because, of course, everything on this earth has a lunar cycle. The ocean, carrots, women, men, puppies, you know, everything has a lunar cycle. And in a way, women are luckier because we are more likely, at least for the central years of our lives, in having a marker of that cycle. So it turned out, for instance, that in Japan, where there is a very high-speed and dangerous transportation system, as you know, they were having a terrific accident rate. So they caused the men who were, and they were all men, I'm sorry to say, who were working in the transportation system to work out mathematically by, coming from birth date forward with cycles of 28, their monthly cycles. And they cut the accident rate in half. So in a way, we need to think about the situation of men too, whose tyranny, whose political oppression consists of being told they don't have cycles, that they are rock-like, consistent, always the same, and the stress of having to maintain that fiction is huge. So perhaps we could have a men's auxiliary. But I do think we need to think about that, because as long as we view what is uniquely female as a handicap, it will have a negative connotation, when in fact the suppression of women's birth-giving powers was really about their power and superiority. Now, here's another example. One day I had a scholarship at the Smithsonian, where I was the second woman ever, and which was kind of funny in itself. But anyway, so I was reading a book about religious architecture. And this guy, who's a historian of religious architecture, says, like everybody knows it, which I think more people do now because of the internet, but anyway, I didn't know it, that of course, since the central function of a patriarchal religion is to first physically control reproduction with all kinds of rules and restrictions and so on, and doubly or triply so if it's a racist culture, because in order to maintain racial difference, you have to control with whom women have children. That having controlled the physical act of birth still left this grand mythic power, right, of giving birth. So, as he said calmly, of course, most patriarchal or monotheistic religious structures are built to resemble the body of a woman. So what you get is an outer entrance, an inner entrance, labia majora, labia minora, vestibula in between, which I think is the same anatomical word actually. A vaginal aisle up the center, two curved ovarian structures on either side, and the altar in the center, which is the womb where the miracle takes place, where men dressed in skirts, I added that. But it's true, I mean, because they were imitating it. Essentially say, you were born of an inferior creature, sex, you were born in sin. But if you obey the rules of the patriarchy, we can go women one better. Yes, they gave you life. We can give you everlasting life. And of course, who can prove to the contrary? So they sprinkle imitation birth fluid over your head and give you a new name and say, you're reborn. I mean, there was not really a concept of heaven in the worked out, minute way that we see now with 4 virgins and rewards and the pearly gates and whatever. Before patriarchy came along, there was a concept really, as with the original cultures on this continent, there was a concept of joining your ancestors. People would light fires so that you could join your ancestors on the other side of the mountain and so on. But it was not heaven or everlasting life, which was really invented to outdo the power of women to give birth. So I think, the more we examine this, the more we understand that if we follow the thread of what you are studying, it shows us the depth of the politics of religion, I mean, most of religion is just politics in the sky. Spirituality is something quite different. And there are brave people inside all the great religious traditions trying to restore or bring spirituality to those institutions and to diminish the division of human beings into male and female, into races, into priesthood and non-priesthood, which is also a mark of these kinds of hierarchical religions. So, you know, I don't know how to tell you this, but I think you have the key to everything. That's right. And the attitudes toward it, toward menstruation, tell us so much. And thanks to you, and thanks to all of our movements, we've made a lot of progress. I mean, we've gone. I know that lots of people still call it the curse, but I think fewer people probably do. And the other day I was watching while I'm brushing my teeth, I have a little television in the bathroom, don't you do that? And I was watching The Doctors, you know, this series called The Doctors. And there's one woman doctor of the four, and there was a question about menstruation, and I think, I don't know how it came up, but she was sitting there calmly saying that having sex during menstruation was often experienced as extra pleasurable because there's more lubrication and there's more likelihood, therefore, of an orgasm. I thought, this is on my television? And so we've come that distance. But as we see from watching these scenes, we definitely have a seriously long way to go. Now, for me, there has also been a kind of habit of mind that grew out of this long ago essay, because from it I discovered the pleasures and the illumination of reversals. Because, you know, the biases that have to do with half the population are so deep and big, as racial biases in the world are too, that you know, they're like the air we breathe, and so we don't see them unless we reverse them and see what it looks like the other way around. So as the most direct descendant of this essay is that in the next book I decided I would reverse Freud. So I created Phyllis Freud, and I reversed all of his ridiculous theories. I mean, it was just unspeakably ridiculous. So, and I meant it to be a little essay. That's a short essay. But I started to read and I couldn't believe it. I kept calling up my friends saying, do you know that he thought that the purse was a symbol of the vagina? You know, I mean, I was stunned, you know, how much he hated this country, how we sent here a guy who was known to sexually abuse children and had a penis with a ring, and I mean, you know, the guy was and that he himself was sexually abused as a child and realized it, then suppressed it, invented the seduction theory to account for, you know, all this stuff. So I decided I would create Phyllis Freud, and I had such a good time reversing all of his. The only thing was that the theories were so far-fetched that I had to footnote everything to point out that he really said this. So if you look at the essay, sometimes the essay is like this and the footnote is like this. But that was a direct descendant of this essay. And then one day I was sitting on the plane, and the young man next to me, well, we'd been sitting on the tarmac, you know, for 2 hours or something. So to pacify us, they gave us a free movie. And the young guy next to me said to the flight attendant, okay, but no chick flicks. So I thought, well, that's interesting, you know. That's a designation, but where is the parallel designation? So I went home and wrote an essay about prick flicks. Because we all know the difference, right? I mean, the chick flicks has a lot of dialogue. It's about how people live. Brit flicks is practically no dialogue. It's about machines and how they die. So I thought, okay, this guy, if he's looking for what he wants, the poor bastard doesn't have a designation, you know. And if it hadn't been for this essay, I never would have thought about that. Then, of course, there are those reversals that just come to you in life. I was in a taxi in Boston a very long time ago with Florence Kennedy. How many folks here remember the great Flo Kennedy, right? She was my traveling lecture partner for many, many years. And we were sitting in the back of a taxi in Boston that had an unusual driver because it was an old Irish woman. And Flo was discussing her book called Abortion Rap. And so the old woman, probably younger than I am now, but anyway, the old woman turned around and said to us, honey, if men could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament. So I just want to commend to you in your work the power of reversal, because I do think that we are still in a culture in which the air we breathe is about dividing people, labeling people, and supposing that a single factor in a complex human being is going to dictate our entire lives. And I know that one day there will be a speaker talking to your group, a group like this in the future, and the old speaker, like me, I'm an old speaker, will be trying to convince young people that there was ever a time when people thought that the degree of melanin in your skin dictated your whole human future, or that your genitals dictated your brain. And people will be, you know, the young people will be saying, oh, give me a break. That could never have been true. And all of you here are leading to that day. I just had the fun and excitement of being in London for the Chime for Change concert with Beyonce and Madonna, and you know, it was an incredible, incredible experience. And I had, of course I don't sing, I mean I wasn't there to sing. So I had to think of some way that would convey to, like, I don't know what, you know, 60,000 people. I mean, I couldn't even see the end of this huge stadium. And I had 2 minutes to speak. So I took an image that in fact comes from a book I really, really recommend you to read, which is called Sex and World Peace by Valerie Hudson. Sex and World Peace from Columbia University Press, published last year, which takes 100 countries, 100 modern countries, current countries, and demonstrates without doubt that the biggest indicator of whether that country will be violent within itself or will be militarily violent towards other countries is not poverty or natural resources or religion or even degree of democracy. It's violence against females.
Yes.
And violence against females has to do with controlling reproduction.
Yes.
And that's, you know, menstruating is a sign of it, right? Both we're shamed when we have it and devalued when we stop having it. Right? I mean, it's, you know, it's like you can't do anything right. But, and at the end of the book, which I really recommend to you, she, and actually there are 5 authors, but she's the main author. She has a wonderful image, which is what I tried to use at this concert, which is that the human race, human beings, are like a bird with 2 wings. And if one is broken, no one can fly. So I thank you for helping us fly.
we've gotten a great story tonight to take away, and you created some great stories for us, and we're going to remember those. Thanks.